Nevergrave, The Witch and the Curse is a Soulslike Roguelike Metroidvania. So most of the minute-to-minute gameplay is what you'd expect from a Soulslike Metroidvania, but every time you die, you're back in the church, and enemies reset. Time for a new run. Personally, I think the game's coolest feature is that you get to play as a corrupted witch's hat, meaning you're not playing as the main character so much as possessing her most of the time. And the hat can detach from the main character and possess enemies, like this cute little doggo, and you get to play as them for a bit. On the other hand, my least favorite part ended up being the roguelike elements, but more on that later. So, welcome to another episode of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, a series where I take a look at a game, give it my thoughts, maybe it's a first impression, maybe it's a full review. I do so by going over the good, aka the things I like that I think the game does well, the bad, things I dislike, and the ugly, bugs, glitches, and stuff that might not be bad at all, it just bugs me in a little bit of a weird way. In this case, the video is going to be based off of my first 5 or so hours playing Nevergrave. And so let's get into things. Before I do though, a quick thanks to Pocket Pair for sending me a key to try out the game. So first up, one of my favorite parts of the game is the possession mechanic. So I wanted to talk about it a little more right at the top. At any time, you can hit your right bumper to unpossess your main body. Then you're just a hat. You can sort of attack, you can jump, you can move around. This can be used while platforming to jump just a little bit higher and then reform your body on the new platform. But it can also be used to possess enemies, like this cute little doggo, who definitely just wants to maul your face off, but that's fine, he's dead now, and also you get to take control of him, so he's super friendly. Taking control of an enemy gives you a new moveset. The dog can jump, it can lick, and it can do a big bite attack that basically one-shot stuff. Also, the dog acts as a secondary health bar. Because health is a pretty scarce resource, this is great. And in the case of a doggo, you can use them to access a new area. Best Boy here can attack these purple floating platforms to jump higher, then a little bit higher, then a little bit higher yet again. And then at the very last second, that's right, you can reach this hidden floating platform and get a whole bunch of treasure. Then when I got to the second area, I got to control this guy, a big meaty tank with a charge attack and a shield, which smashes through enemies and can also be used to bully unfortunate chickens, which, by the way, fun fact, you can catch them and they provide you with eggs and other resources. Now, something else the game does a good job with is the pace of content as you progress. In the first area, you begin with a fairly simple toolkit, a 3-hit melee combo plus a spell. But as you explore, you quickly unlock blueprints, which you can use to access new spells and tools. And I happen to notice that most of the tools inflict some kind of elemental status on enemies, as do a lot of the effects from the blessings and the grimoires. Then, as I explored a little bit more, went down a bit further, I got an air dash. And from that point, the whole level opened up, because areas that were previously inaccessible, there were like these whole paths with a bunch of spikes, and every time I jumped, I fell into them. Totally doable. It was made for the air dash. A similar thing happened in the second area. As I was exploring, I met this weird girl who turned out to be a jeweler, and she unlocked the equipment system for me. If it wasn't for some of my problems with the roguelike structure of this game, I would say the pacing of these unlocks is absolutely perfect. But I do have some problems with the game, and they do stem from the roguelike structure, and so I think it's time to move on to the next section of the video. And I want to open this part with a bit of a disclaimer. The more I played, the more I realized I was not enjoying the combination of roguelike with Metroidvania, and in this section, I'm going to detail why. But if you've been watching my video so far, going, this looks awesome, I think Nevergrave is going to be great, I really like the idea of roguelike plus Metroidvania, please do not let my experience stop you from giving the game a shot. And so, with that out of the way, let's get into things, starting with how the roguelike elements are a little bit weird. Because each of the game's areas is divided into 3 subzones, and each subzone is more difficult. After you go through all 3, you get a boss fight. But here's the thing. You can only explore 1 new subzone in an area per run. When you reach the end of the subzone for the first time, you enter the Nexus, where you're confronted by this locked gate. Interact with it to unlock a lock. You do not get to progress further, and instead, you exit and head back to the church and start a new run to do it all over again. Very quickly, I found this to be both tedious and frustrating, because it meant no matter how many cool boons I got, no matter how well I played, I wouldn't actually be able to progress beyond the next subzone until I had unlocked them all, at which point I could finally go through everything and challenge the boss. Which runs counter to one of the things that I enjoy the most about roguelikes, which is that progression tends to be bursty. Let's take another game as an example, the Rogue Prince of Persia. In each run, I was making steady progress, but then I got an awesome poison build, where I crit everything I poisoned everything I crit, and all of a sudden I was killing the final boss without any issue at all. I absolutely breezed through it. In Nevergrave, there are cool build options. And yes, when I took on the boss of the first area, I had an awesome bleed build, with all sorts of crazy perks that I'd built up from the entire run. But before that, every cool build, every run I did where I was like, oh, this build is awesome, it ended at a locked door. And so I didn't get to experience that thrill of challenging a boss with all the power that I'd built up. And that's the thing. By the time I got to that boss, yes, I had a fun build, but I was already tired of going through the subzones. The game uses procedural generation, but I very quickly found myself up against the same enemies in very similar looking areas, listening to the same soundtrack looping over and over and over again, feeling like I was grinding away at a progression system that was hiding the fact that the game didn't have quite enough content. This certainly isn't helped by the fact that most of the enemies that you face in the very first part of a map are exactly the same enemies you'll be facing in the second and the third, and some of those enemies will still be present in the next area of the game. The next area does mix in some new foes, but there's a lot of familiar faces. Far too many in my opinion. The difference is that later on, they have more health and hit harder, which also makes it harder to gauge fights. Normally, whether it's in a Soulslike or a roguelike, when I come across an enemy, their stats are going to be relatively static. Yes, there could be modifiers on the run that make them easier or harder, but it's not like the same enemy typically has double or triple the health just because you encounter them later on in your run. And so I found myself often struggling to gauge difficulty, which incentivized me to just run past stuff, which runs counter to the way I normally play Metroidvanias. I like to take my time, explore the little nooks and crannies. But here, if I didn't run past stuff, that was just health I was going to lose. And I didn't really need that many blessings or grimoires if my goal was simply to run past enemies and get to the next locked door. I could collect those grimoires when I'm actually trying to take on the boss and able to complete the area. Now, between runs, you're sent back to the church, and this is where you can enter the village. It's a small little area that is fully buildable. Overall, the building mechanics are pretty good. It kind of reminds me of Terraria, and there's even a couple of NPCs who like to hang out there. Progressing unlocks new blueprints. Some of these are purely cosmetic. Others are spells or tools. This is also where you unlock all of the game's progression systems. So, the village is very important because this is your meta progression. Or most of it. You do get blueprints and artifacts like the midair dash within your run. Everything else, though, it comes from the village. And if you want to unlock stuff in the village, you're going to need gold, and you're also going to need extra resources. At first, I was unlocking stuff at a good pace. I unlocked farming, I grew myself some tomatoes. The food buff helped me get further. That all felt good. But then I found the skill trees. So here we have the combat skill tree, which starts with sword mastery. The normal attack deals more damage. Well, that's good. I want to deal more damage. Then it goes to sneak attack, where you deal more damage when backstabbing enemies. Over here I have more MP restored. That means more spells, also more damage, especially since spells and tools are very good at dealing with enemies from range. On the survival tree, max HP plus 60 is huge. That is a huge buff. Taking less damage, also very big. That is the difference between struggling and getting through without too many issues. Increasing max potion capacity. The potion capacity is 1 from the start. Healing is super scarce. The thing is, you'll notice there's a whole bunch of different random looking ingredients. Some of them are found within the run, like rocks and logs and bits of monsters. But some of them require you to get other things and then craft from here. So if I wanted to make an artificial flower, I would need the weird purpley ore, but I would also need to make some glue. And I make some glue by killing some spiders for spider webs, killing some slimes for their eyes, and doing this, and then waiting. If I want to make a candle, I have to turn some monster bits into wax, and to do that, I have to wait, Then after I wait, I have to make the candle. I can't queue it because I don't have the materials yet, and I'll have to wait yet again. This means there's a whole lot of extra waiting involved, or extra steps, if you will, every time you're trying to progress, which makes the game feel far more grindy than it probably actually is. Alright, now it's the fun part. It's time for the ugly, the things that don't matter much, but I just found them a little annoying or weird. The first of which is an interaction that doesn't actually do very much, but drove me crazy a couple times. See, throughout the video, you've probably seen that D-pad up is interact. This prompt pops up all the time. Makes sense. You want to know how to interact with stuff. Here's the thing. Left stick up is also interact. And so I found myself opening the portal menu or talking to NPCs when I was trying to jump, because left stick up is also jump. Next up, you can rearrange items in the village. You do this by opening the build menu, then hitting X, and then you can't reposition stuff, because then you have to highlight the item's type from a submenu. The problem is I would often forget the subtype of the item that I was trying to manipulate, leaving me guessing a few times before I ultimately got it right. Also, there are times where contact damage can be frustrating. Most of the time, it's fine. Yes, enemies are lethal. They are also very aggressive. They're going to try to hit you, and if you touch them, they hurt you. But here's the thing. Stunned enemies don't seem to inflict contact damage. So I would often stay close to them, and every once in a while, I'd just get hit out of nowhere because they came unstunned for just 1 second before dying or getting restunned. Which was especially frustrating early on when I didn't realize what was happening. Not so bad later because realistically I probably shouldn't be doing that. But hey, it's a weird quirk and I wanted to mention it. And so ultimately, I came away feeling that Nevergrave was a bit of a Marmite sandwich. Yes, some people will enjoy the blend of roguelike and Metroidvania. But for me personally, it's a miss. When I play a Soulslike or a Metroidvania, I want to take my time. I want to explore. I actually bounced off Elden Ring Night Rain for very similar reasons. But exploring the corners of a world that's just going to be reset doesn't feel meaningful to me. And then when I'm playing a roguelike, I want to have that god run. I want to have an OP build and wreck stuff. And I don't want to have to go through 3 goddamn doors to do it. But hey, this could just be me being a grumpy old man yelling at clouds because the games are different and I just don't understand. There are a lot of things here that I can totally see people loving. The possession mechanic is really cool. It spices up the gameplay in a great way. Also, even when you're not possessing upper monsters, the combat feels pretty darn good by itself. While there aren't that many enemies, most of them do feel pretty fair. A couple enemies may be just a little bit bullshit, but you know, every Souls-like game has just a couple of bullshit enemies sprinkled in there. It's like the salt, it's the seasoning. Or actually maybe we're the salt, I don't know, tell me down in the comments. So even though the game didn't ultimately end up being for me, I'm glad I checked it out and gave it a shot. Big thanks to Pocket Pair for sending me the key. What about you? Is Nevergrave going to be up your alley? Or are you not a fan of Marmite sandwiches? Let me know. Also, if you want to see more stuff from me, get subscribed. And also, if you want to see my thoughts on more games, things like the good, bad, and the ugly, maybe even full reviews, well, head over to my Steam Curator page. It is linked down below. And I've got thoughts on a whole bunch of games. I have over 100 reviews, some of which fully detailed with videos, some of them just a nice simple Steam review, 200 characters. But that's going to be it for me today, so thank you very much for watching to the end. I'm glad you've enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one.